All right, good to go. Welcome to today's devotional. Hope you're having a great day today. We're working our way through Proverbs, and so we're just going to go right to it today, verse 20 of chapter 6. We've been going one verse at a time, so we're at verse 20, chapter 6. And so that's what we're going to look at today. If you've been following this series at all, or if you've read Proverbs yourself on your own at all, you'll recognize this phrase. It appears in various forms in much of the early part of the book of Proverbs. Let me read the verse and you'll see. It says, "My son, observe the commandment of your father, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother." So this sentence, or very similar ones, are throughout the early parts of Proverbs. It's a repeated sentiment. Now it's an indicator of a change. So it's kind of like a okay, next kind of a thing, sort of an indicator that we're changing topics. But it's also repeated for emphasis sake, so that we will realize the importance of learning wisdom, that it is something that you don't just automatically come with, and that you need to learn it. And so it's kind of a way. It's almost like a little idiom of speech in a sense of just saying, okay, now pay attention. And so once again, it's doing that. So you could go back to any of those verses, watch the video there, and get some idea there. But what I want to do today is I want to just use the opportunity, since it's mentioning this idea again, just to use the opportunity to maybe take a little, just give a little advice um, about parenting. Now, in previous ones, we talked about being the child learning from your parents, but I thought today maybe I'd just give a little advice. So this isn't what this scripture is teaching directly, but there's some implication here about the importance of parenting, or being a good child and listening and learning from your parents. So I thought I'd just give this a little bit of advice for what it's worth. Take it or leave it. But a really important thing, and I do think it's biblical, but a really important thing to remember about parenting is it's your best chance at success as a parent is to start early, to be very deliberately a teaching parent. And and this not everybody does this. Part of what motivated my thinking this way this week is that I happened to observe an interaction with a parent, between a parent and a child. I was a bit distant from the interaction, but I was able to hear the interaction more than see it. But this interaction, and it was, you could tell the poor parent was really struggling. The child wasn't listening, was really misbehaving very badly, and the parent, I felt very bad for the parent because they didn't seem to know what to do, and they were exasperated. So it just occurred to me again. It's like, yeah, a lot of parents who struggle, right? It can be very hard raising a child. Even the most successful parents in the world, will tell you stories of times when they were just at their wits' end with their child. That's not foreign to the idea of parenting. Parenting, it can be challenging by times. But this idea of learning to teach your kids immediately, like not by immediately, I mean very very young. As soon as, no, I don't mean as soon as they come out of the womb. You don't sit down and start teaching them, but very very soon after there, you do have to realize that children are designed to learn. Like, every part of them is about learning. They're in their minds are at the highest stage of adopting new material at their young years, and they're looking at the world, they're discovering things. I mean, they learn a language with no frame of reference. That's pretty impressive. And they do all this and they learn all this. They're just designed to learn, and they're rapidly building in their brain an understanding of the world. And that includes not just what to call things, that this is a dog and that's a cat, but it includes how to live, the kinds of stuff that Proverbs teaches, right? How do I live? How do I be a person? And how do I be this kind of person? What kind of person am I? And and they look to their parents to get lots of clues about what it is to be a person in the world, a human in the world. And so, of course, we can teach them alphabet, and we can teach them, addition. And as they get older, we can increase the amount of that kind of knowledge and that kind of teaching. But the kind of teaching I'm talking about today is just is the teaching that's about the kinds of stuff that Proverbs teaches, how to be a good person in the world. And you really need to start teaching that right away, almost like really, really early. It is a lot easier to raise a child well if you start well and consistently stay on the path than it is to start poorly and then later in life realize that you made some mistakes and you try to fix them, that's great, but it's hard. It's really hard. It's a lot easier if you start on the right footing right away, and then build on that good foundation you laid right away, and build consistently on that good foundation. Then when you get to the age where the child is, whatever, 12, then you've taught them the foundations of being a good person, and you've taught them how to learn from you, and so they're going to be even better at learning in the future. And so it's really important. And this isn't to make you feel despairing if you're at the later stage in your, that adolescent era, and you realize all the mistakes. There's help for you. There's ways to turn it around. And not today's video isn't about that, but there is. So don't despair. But just for anybody who might be starting out, or maybe you're going to have kids in the future, I really want to encourage you to realize the importance of teaching right away. Sort of like with a puppy. Now, kids aren't puppies. When you get a puppy, it's so cute, and you like to play with it and wrestle with it, and you let it bite you, and you can have this feeling like it's just too cute to bother with any kind of discipline and training. And you do that, and then all of a sudden you realize dogs grow very quickly, and then you're in a rough spot because you haven't trained the dog, and so now you have a bad dog, a dog that's gone a little bit too wild, perhaps. And I've seen those scenarios too. Well, with a kid, it's kind of like that. Only we're more complex than a dog, but the child is building ideas in their mind, in their subconscious. We call them scripts, but they're little ways of going, here's how I deal with this situation, and here's how I deal with that situation, here's how I do with this situation. And they're building. They don't know they're building. They just are. Like, every time your child experiences a new scenario, some part of their brain is saying, what do I do? What do I do? And once they go through the scenario, their brain says, oh, that's what I do. And they write a little script for themselves. So the next time they're in that scenario, their brain just reaccesses that script and says, here's what we do in this scenario. Here's how I handle it. And we do this as adults too, just much less often because we've written most of our scripts. But, every time you go into a room, you go into a theater, perhaps to go watch a movie, and you walk into the room, you don't think about it, but your brain is saying, where should I sit? And it's drawing on stuff you've already built in your brain, right? Oh, I like to sit, in up front or in the back, or I like to have leg room, or I'd like to be in the aisle, or I don't want to be around too many people, or whatever. You're not thinking all that. That's all just happening because you've written these little scripts in your life about how you deal with that scenario, and the many other scenarios, the myriad of scenarios in your life. And children are doing that too. Oh, I fell down. What do I do when I fall down? Well, I cry. Well, or I get up, I brush myself off, or I blame somebody, or I don't blame somebody, or whatever, or I go to my mom, or I go, and they're learning, what do I do when I fall down, or what do I do when someone takes my toy, or what do I do when, and that's all being built. And so parents need to help their children build really good scripts. Otherwise, later in life, then the scripts they learned when they were little are the ones they're going to try and employ as an adult. And the complexity of all the scripts working together, they don't look like children, but yet you probably know some adults who behave very immaturely. And that's part of the reason, because they never really learned beyond, well, I push that guy down and take my toy back. That was the script they learned, and no one ever told them differently. And so now they're older, and they basically do the adult version of pushing someone down and taking their toy back, instead of learning how to talk or learning how to be gracious or whatever. So it's really important to do this and start early. And then I'll give you 2 tips about doing it. Here they are, really quickly. 2 tips about doing that script building. One is consistently teach, like intentionally, consistently teach your kids. Always realize everything you're doing is teaching your kids something. So be intentional about what you're teaching them. Doesn't mean you have to sit down and have a lecture and a class session, but everything you're doing is teaching your child something. So be deliberate about it. Realize, if I'm going to behave this way, they're learning from me, right? Or in this moment, they've done this, and I'm going to make a decision as a parent. Well, I want to be consistent in that decision so that they see that there's a consistent way to deal with things, rather than helter-skelter. And, you can never predict, one day dad's like this, another day he's like that. And no, be consistent. Do the same things. Do them repeatedly. If you say that this is the way we handle this, then handle it that way every time. And if there's an exception for some reason, then teach the exception. Well, in this place, there's an exception because of this, and so you teach that. But you got to be intentional, and you got to be consistent and solid in it, so that your child will learn what you know they need to know to become a good adult. So consistency and intentional consistency, that consistency is really important from an early age. And then the other tip is this: just be very deliberate about how you teach emotion to your kids. Right now in our world, um, everybody is being taught, children as well, that your emotions should rule you, that you should just follow whatever emotion you happen to be having. So follow your heart, right? So if you happen to be hungry, then eat. If you happen to be angry, then yell. If you happen to be sad, then despair. And the world is teaching you just to follow your emotions wherever they lead you. And it leads you to disaster, because emotions are not designed to be in charge. They're designed to augment your mind, but they're not designed to be in charge of you. And so teaching your children from a young age how to have emotions, how to have them well, that it's okay to have them, but how to have them well. And you as the adult, hopefully you know how to have them well. So you can show that to your kids. Here's when I'm angry. It's okay that I'm angry, but when I'm angry, here's how I be angry in a good way. When I'm sad, well, here's how I deal with sad. When I'm hungry, here's how I deal with hunger. When I'm whatever. And then they learn from you slowly. It takes years, but if you're consistent, they will slowly learn from you how to have what we would call emotional regulation, right? The ability to regulate their emotions rather than their emotions regulating them. And it really makes a big difference. And if you can do that from a young age, where you control your own emotions and you teach how to have good, solid emotions, then you won't end up with a lot of these temper tantrums being thrown in supermarkets. Because the child will have learned that's not how we deal with this. It's not how we deal with our disappointments. We don't throw a temper tantrum. What happens, though, sadly, is a lot of parents themselves don't control their own emotions, and they never teach their children to control theirs. So they end up with the supermarket meltdowns, because that's the script the child has learned. It gets them what they want or whatever. So that's the tip: is consistency, deliberate, intentional consistency, and deliberate, intentional emotions, right? So then you can teach those to your kids. If you start when they're young, they'll learn, and when they're older, you'll find it a lot easier to teach them the harder stuff of young adulthood. And if you don't teach them when you're young, you're going to have a hard time when they get to young adulthood. Anyways, hopefully that's useful to you today. If you're in the other scenario where you realize, man, I really messed up, and you're at the other end, don't despair. Do go find help. There's people who can help you. As we go through Proverbs, there'll be little advice coming through, but get help, because you can come back from bad teaching. You can work around that, but you might need a little help to do it. Anyways, God bless you. Have a good day, and God help us to be good parents in Jesus' name. God willing, see you tomorrow.